these two popes were the first two popes to be world figures, to be, as it were, prominent on the world stage. I think before John the 23rd, perhaps the popes had a great impact in Europe, but these two, because of modern media, because of the way things exploded, became world figures. It's fascinating, you know, that Pope John the 23rd was Pope during the time of La Dolce Vita, when the whole business of paparazzi was beginning to appear here in Rome. And he was the first Pope to be snapped constantly by photographers, and the image sent around the world. We're very familiar with that now. But in terms of the papacy, it started with John the 23rd. So he and John Paul II were world figures. Now they will be in the Catholic world held as saints by everybody.
Now, as you know, the canonization of John Paul II in particular is controversial with some people. I mean, let me quote to you the president of the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. "It's time for the Vatican to stop honouring those who enabled wrongdoing." John Paul II is seen by some as a man who not only failed to tackle the scandals of sexual abuse, but really helped to cover it up. How do you answer that?
Well, I have a great deal of understanding, I think, of the huge hurt that childhood abuse does. And I understand the anger that people feel when they reflect and feel again what happened to them in their childhood. But we can't judge 20 years ago by what we know today, neither of the impact of the childhood abuse, which is much more understood now, thank God, nor of the ways in which abusers behaved and in which they hid their behaviour with great clarity. Pope John Paul was never a man who lacked courage. He was never a man who hesitated for a moment to do what he knew was right. And I think he followed the steps of the time, but the church has moved on since then. And I think it's also important to remember that when somebody like John Paul II is canonized, this isn't a blanket approval of every act he made. He made mistakes. That doesn't stop our understanding of the radical nature of his relationship with God. He struggled with his historic circumstances and his humanity, as we all do. He made mistakes. That doesn't mean to say he didn't lead a very holy life.
So we can say then, can we, that Pope John Paul made mistakes on these issues? In terms of dealing with the whole question of sexual abuse, and that shouldn't stop him from being a saint?
Well, when he was beatified by Pope Benedict in the year 2002, that's exactly what Pope Benedict said. That, you know, here we have a man whose holiness is evident, even though he lived in the history of his day and was open to mistakes like many other people, especially in practical matters. And you know, it is true that our understanding of the effects and the causes of the abuse of children have developed enormously over these years. And it's therefore rather easy to take today's understanding and cast it back as a judgment on 15 years ago.
So, do you think, are you sort of arguing that he perhaps didn't really understand what was going on? That these are modern day concepts that he wouldn't have grasped?
I think that there were many people who didn't know what was going on. And that wasn't just the case in the church. We've seen that in our country, where the abuse of children is now being discovered in all sorts of institutions. And so in that sense, there was a profound lack of understanding, for example, of the deviousness of a paedophile. We know that in many institutions in England now. But I think what is important for us to remember today is that the work of the church in these things has progressed as quickly as anybody else's. And I believe that the church locally, where these responsibilities lie, especially in England, is now responding with great thoroughness and with the help of outside professionals. And we see the Holy See doing the same. But none of that takes from this judgment that in John Paul II, we see a man who lived his life and died intensely in the presence of God. And it's that the intensity, the radical nature of the way he trusted God and lived his life in service of God that is being praised and held as an example through his canonization.